All right, so up to this point, we've been talking about for loops and list comprehensions and the like. And these are all instances where we do some kind of iteration, where we either have a known number of times we want to iterate over, or we have an object that contains a set amount of elements to iterate over. But there's also times where we need to do some kind of iteration until some condition is met, okay? And we can do this with a while loop. And the syntax here is while some condition holds, or we could also have while this condition does not hold, we want to execute some code. A very simple example would be, let's say we have x equals 1. Now, while x is less than 10, I want to execute some code. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and say print x equals, and then whatever x is, and then I'm going to increment x, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that with plus equals 1, so on. So we can see if I run this now, while x, as long as x is less than 10, we're going to iterate over and execute this code, and it's going to come back, recheck the value of x. If this condition still holds, then we're going to continue to loop until that condition is not met. And then that's when we end up breaking the loop. All right, so let's go ahead and use this knowledge of while checks to perform this knowledge check. So basically what we're looking at here is performing a random walk. And in its most basic form, a random walk is where we have some value, let's say value equals 0. And then, and before I do this, I'm going to go ahead and import random. All right. So we have some value, and each step along the way, what we're going to do is randomly select the value of -1 or 1, right? So I'll just say this is some random value. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add the random value to our initial value. All right, so let's see what happens. So I do that, it looks like the first random value or number was 1. Now we can do this multiple times, right? So basically I could iterate over and, and each step along the way, each iteration, I'm going to randomly select either -1 or 1. I'm going to add it to value, right? So we do it this time, and it actually turns out value equals 0. Let me do it again. That time it ended up being -2. And I could run it again, and it's 0, and again it's -2. Okay, so that's the idea of a random walk. Now, what we want to do is we want to fill in this code so that while this random walk, while our value that we initially created, as we randomly add either -1 or 1 to it, we want to do that until that value exceeds 100 or the number of iterations that we did exceeds 10,000, right? So basically here, have your random walk stop if the value exceeds 100 or if the number of steps taken exceeds 10,000. All right, so we're going to fill in this code so we can accomplish that. All right, so we want to do, so while either the value is less than 100, right? So while value is less than 100, and while the number of tries, the number of iterations is less than 10,000, okay? Now here's the thing. What I want to do is I actually want to iterate this code and perform this random walk process up until that happens, right? So while value is less than 100 and tries is less than 10,000, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So now if either one of these is false, so if we exceed 100, our value exceeds 100, or a number of tries exceeds 10,000, we are going to stop our while loop. So now all I do is I'm going to add this random value that I sample each iteration. And then what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and add 1 to our counter. So now our try starts at 0, and each step along the way we add 1, so we count each iteration. Now I can execute this, and we see in that iteration the final value was 100. So we actually reached 100, right, before we got to 10,000 iterations. Try it again. And now this time I did not reach 100. Actually, I stopped at -70, where value equals -70. But I stopped because we got to 10,000 iterations.